Good morning, students. In today's class, we are going to deal with the three literary terms, namely ode, conceit, simile, and metaphor. In yesterday's class, we took two important literary terms, sonnet and lyric. When discussing about sonnet and lyric, I told you how many kinds of sonnets are there, what is the rhyme scheme, and who were the practitioners of those particular sonnets. Then we talked in detail about lyric. So in today's class, we're going to talk about another genre of poetry, that is ode. Now let me define what is an ode. An ode is a long lyric poem, serious in subject, elevated in style, and elaborate in its stanzaic structure. As Norman Maclean has said, the term now calls to mind a lyric which is massive, public in its proclamation, and Pindaric in its classical prototype. The prototype was established by the Greek poet Pindar, whose odes were modeled on the songs by the chorus in drama. His complex stanzas were patterned in sets of three. Moving in a dance rhythm to the left, the chorus chanted the strophe. Moving to the right, the antistrophe, and then standing still, the epode. The regular or Pindaric ode in English is a learned imitation of Pindaric form, with all the strophes and antistrophes written in one kind of stanza and all the epodes in another. The typical construction may be conveniently studied in Thomas Gray's The Progress of Poesy. The irregular ode was introduced in 1656 by Abraham Cowley, who imitated the Pindaric style and matter but disregarded the recurrent strophic triad, allowing each stanza to find its own pattern of varying line lengths, number of lines, and rhyme scheme. This type of irregular stanzaic structure, altering freely in accordance with shifts in subject and mood, has been the most common for the English ode ever since Wordsworth's great ode, Imitations of Immortality, is representative. Pindaric's odes were encomiastic, or written in praise and glorify someone, in this instant, the winners in the Olympic Games. The earlier English odes and many later ones were also written to eulogize something, either a person, Dryden's Annie Killigrew, or the arts of music or poetry, Dryden's Alexander's Feast, or a time of day, Collins's Ode to Evening, or abstract grace, Hymns to Adversity, and Wordsworth's Ode to Duty. Romantic poets perfected the personal ode of description and passionate meditation, which is stimulated by an aspect of the outer scene and turns on the attempt to solve either a private problem or a generally human one. As for example, Wordsworth's Imitation Ode, Coleridge's Dejection and Ode, Shelley's Ode to the West Wind, and recent examples of this type are Alan Tate's Ode to the Confederate Dead and Wallace Stevens' The Idea of Order at Key West. The Horatian Ode was originally modeled on the matter, tone, and form of the odes of the Roman Horace. In contrast to the passion and visionary boldness of Pindar's odes, Horatian odes are calm, meditative, and restrained, and they are usually homostrophic, that is, written in a single repeated stanza form. Examples are Marvell's and Horatian Ode upon Cromwell's written from Ireland and Keats' Ode to Autumn. So dear students, we now understand what is an ode, which is a long lyric poem. It is serious in subject, elevated in style, and elaborate in its stanza structure. We have two kinds of odes, the regular or Pindaric ode and the Horatian ode. Now let us take what is conceit. Let us discuss what we call conceit. Originally meaning a concept or image, conceit came to be the name for figure of speech which establishes a striking parallel, usually an elaborate parallel between two apparently dissimilar things or situation. The term, once derogatory, is now best employed as a neutral identification of a poetic device. Two types of conceit are often distinguished. The first one, the Petrarchan conceit. It is a type of figure used in love poems which had novel and effective in the Italian poet Petrarch, but often became hackneyed in his imitators, the Elizabethan sonneteers. The figure consisted of detailed and exaggerated comparisons applied to the disdainful mistress, as cold and cruel as she is beautiful, and to the distress and despair of the worshipful lover. Sir Thomas Watt, for example, in his sonnet My Gallery Charged with Forgetfulness, circumstantially parallels the lover's state to a ship laboring in a storm, and in another sonnet, Like to These Unmeasurable Mountains, he compares it to an alpine landscape. A third sonnet by Watt begins with a familiar Petrarchan conceit, an oxymoron describing the simultaneous fever and chills experienced by a sufferer from the disease of love. To quote, I find no peace and all my war is done. I fear and hope, I burn and freeze in ice. Shakespeare, who at times employed this type of conceit himself, satirized some standard objects pressed into service of similes by Petrarchan sonneteers in a sonnet beginning, My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, why then her breasts are done. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. So this is the first type of conceit that we have discussed, which we call the Petrarchan conceit. Now let us take the second conceit, that is the metaphysical conceit. The metaphysical conceit is a characteristic figure in John Donne and other metaphysical poets of the 17th century. It was described by Dr. Johnson in a famed passage in his Life of Colley as wit, which is a kind of discordant concourse, a combination of dissimilar images, or discovery of occult resemblances in things apparently unlike. The most heterogeneous ideas are yoked by violence together. The metaphysical poets exploited all knowledge, commonplace or esoteric, practical, theological, or philosophical, true or fabulous, for the vehicles of these figures, and their comparisons, whether succinct or expanded, were novel, witty, and their way startlingly effective. In sharp contrast to both the concepts and figures of the conventional Petrarchan is Donne's The Flea, a poem that uses a flea who has bitten both lovers as the basic reference for his argument against the lady's coyness. Similarly, in the poem in Donne's canonization, as the poetic argument develops, the comparison for the relationship between lovers move from the area of commerce and business through various actual and mythical births and diverse forms of historical memorials to a climax which equates the sexual acts and moral status of worldly lovers with the ascetic life and heavenly destination of unworldly saints. The most famous sustained conceit is Donne's parallel in A Valediction Forbidding Mourning, between the continuing relationship of his and his lady's soul, despite the physical parting, to the coordinated movements of the 2 feet of a draughtsman compass. A well-known instance of the chilly and hyperbolic ingenuity of the overdriven metaphysical conceit is Richard Crashaw's description in St. Mary Magdalene of the tearful eye of the repentant Magdalene as, to quote, 2 faithful mountains, 2 walking baths, 2 weeping motions, portable and compendious oceans. Following the great revival of the metaphysical poets in the 1920s, a number of modern poets exploited this type of conceit. Examples are T.S. Eliot's comparison of the evening to a patient's etherized upon a table, and the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, and the series of startling figurative vehicles in Dylan Thomas. In memory of Anne Jones, the vogue for such conceits extended even to popular love songs in the 1920s, and later by well-educated composers such as Cole Porter, You're the Cream in My Coffee, and You Are the Tops. So we have taken up 2 points in this class. We have discussed what an ode is, and the second that we have taken for discussion is conceit. The last topic that we take in today's class is simile and metaphor. Now let me tell you what is a simile. When we talk about simile, it is basically a comparison between 2 distinctly different things indicated by the word like or as. A simple example is Burns' Oh my love's like a red, red rose. The following simile from the Wordsworth's Ode Intimations of Immortality differs from Burns in that it specifies the aspect in which custom is similar to frost, that is heavy, and to life, deep. To quote, and custom lie upon thee with the weight, heavy as frost and deep almost as life. In a metaphor, a word which is standard or literal, usage denotes one kind of a thing, quality, or action is applied to another, in the form of a statement of identity instead of comparison. For example, if Burns had said, Oh, my love is a red, red rose, he would have used, technically speaking, a metaphor instead of a simile. Here is a complex metaphor from Stephen Spender. Eyes gazelle, delicate wanderer, drinker of horizons, fluid line. It should be noted that these metaphors can be analyzed into 2 elements. In a usage now widely adopted, I.A. Richards introduced the term tenor for the subject to which the metaphoric word is applied. My love, in the altered line from Burns, and I, in spender, and the term vehicle for the metaphoric word itself rose in Burns and the three words gazelle, wander, and drink in spender. The metaphoric use of a verb occurs in Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice, Act 5, Scene 1. How sweet the moonlight steps upon his bank, and the metaphoric use of an adjective occurs in Andrew Marvell's The Garden. There are other kinds of metaphors too. We can refer to them as a mixed metaphor. It can be a dead metaphor. It can be a metonymy, and a few which are not prescribed in the syllabus. For the general understanding students, we are just to study the difference between the simile and metaphor. So I hope you understood the three terms that we have taken up in the class: ode, conceit, simile, and metaphor. More of literary terms in tomorrow's class. Thank you.